Seek above all for a game worth playing. Oh baby, it's witchcraft contagious. I felt it for ages. We're out of these cages in this house of mages. It's witchcraft, it's dangerous. Beware of these pages. There's spells of all flavors in this house of mages. In this house of mages. In this house of mages.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Make Yoga Magick Again, the House of Mages podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Erulian Cuming. I am a mischievous mage, a lover of wisdom, a seeker of mysteries, and a ritual embodiment yoga teacher trainer, amongst a myriad of many other weird and wonderful things. In this episode, I chat with heretical historian Cassandra Paulke. Cassandra is a much-needed breath of fresh air in the current spiritual entrepreneurship climate. In an age where most healers and intuitives don't dig much deeper than the bottom of their cacao cups, Cassandra has been busy excavating the fiery depths of the human soul, intentionally leaving open the entranceways so that the keen may follow and the spurious receive their own trip if they don't watch their steps. With a Bachelor of Arts in History, Cassandra has realized that the true power of tracing the future branches of a tree is knowing the form of its roots. She artfully blends astromancy, cartomancy, talisman creation, womb wisdom, and contemporary healing practices with a grounding in traditional folklore, occultism, and the magical arts. With her signature dash of cheeky humor and Leo flair, Cassandra is weaving her own unique threads into the webwork of the world and already causing a stir with her heretical and numinous knotwork. So without further ado, talismanic creatrix and cosmic void weaver, Cassandra Paulke. It is my great pleasure to introduce one of my best friends in all the worlds. And I have so much beautiful, amazing stuff to say about this lovely human. Cassandra Paulke, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me yet again.
Other than introducing this lovely human to the world, or reintroducing this lovely human to the world, if we released the last podcast, the reason why I wanted to chat to Cass was because our relationship over the last few years has evolved and shifted and changed. We might release a more detailed podcast about that sometime if you're curious. But she has just impressed me in so many ways, especially in her capacity to receive, digest, and curiously unravel information in a way that I don't see very often. And I was trying to explain to Cass what I wanted to talk to her about. And basically, that idea of osmosis is like, whoever you hang around, you'll absorb some of their tendencies. So I just want to basically like rub Cass, like
rub me onto people, rub me across the world.
Basically, I just want to get some Cassie osmosis out to the world.
It's my biggest dream.
Yeah, and it's a mixture of things. It's not one specific skill. It's your ability to have conversation, but that translates on a lot of different things in how we related and how we've been able to stay such close friends. And so I just want to start with when was the first time you were aware of how you were interpreting and digesting information? Do you have a moment growing up where you were told something, or you read something, or you learned something, and instead of just reacting to something where you were something doesn't add up here, because you definitely have the investigator archetype. I'd love to hear a bit about that.
That is a good question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is, so I was brought up very, very loosely, very, very loosely Lutheran. I say that because like we were active churchgoers, but I didn't go to like Bible school or anything like that. And Lutheran is just a sub-branch of Christianity, and it is a bit more chill than like Catholicism. And then from there, because I grew up in a little country town, but at 7 I moved to the city, so you had to kind of change and adapt. And I moved to multiple primary schools as well, so that has that effect of trying to be accepted by other people and understanding other people. And then went to a Catholic school for high school. And I think the reason I frame it like that is because I think one of the standout moments that I think many people come across is when you're like, when they say God is the creator of all things. And then you're like, cool, but who created God? And then you just go into that mind. It's like, well, he's just this, or, you know, it's this all powerful being. It just created itself. It's like, well, what were the forces that created it? And then what were the forces that created those things that created it? And then it's just like a spiral.
Yeah.
And so I think that for me was like a standout moment of just that awakening of curiosity that contradicted your conditioning and upbringing. And it was like the pinnacle of, hang on, what is it that I believe in? And it's the unraveling of the constructs around you.
Yeah.
And I think that was high school, early high school. It could have been late primary school, possibly earlier, but how I'm kind of seeing it in my head is around more prominently high school. And then when I started studying history as electives at school was just a stepping stone to further unravelings and the skills you're taught to study history. It's not just learning dates and names. It's how you interact with the source material, and then how you interact with the multiple source materials, and then how they interact with one another, and then thinking about the people that wrote those source materials, their motives, where they're coming from, and kind of getting into the heads of the people that wrote the material and why they did that. That, and then doing drama, I think, as well, where you get in the heads of characters and have to embody that. It kind of gives you more of an understanding of other people and their motives, to then when you're in that point of in a discussion and things kind of don't start adding up, it's trying to see from their perspective. And it's like, okay, I can only understand it from my level of understanding, from what I've been subjected to. But because I've got a Libra moon, just putting astrology into it, I'm trying to neutralize and find the balance. That's what I'm constantly kind of striving for, is to have harmony. So I try to try to see their perspective and be like, oh, okay, no, I can see where you're coming from. How I'm seeing it is through this, that, and the other.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, that is a good mix, because I'm also really curious, and we've chatted about this, of like, because it seems like something that is either can't truly be taught, like it has to be like a genuine innate curiosity to unravel the mysteries of life, and how far you go with that. But also, yeah, what is it that sparks that, and what skills can you learn? Because essentially, you know, like House of Mages, like I want to, as much as possible, give people an opportunity to develop those skills needed. So that's really interesting. Like I didn't really think of, like, history is an obvious one, but what you're talking about with the acting stuff, it makes so much sense, because you start to realize if you can be one character, like, and, you know, especially if you vibe with that character, like what's the difference between you playing that character and you playing the character that you are with your family and the character that you are with your friends at school, and like you start to notice, like,
yeah, and it's the character analysis when you're doing drama as well, of like, same with doing history and looking at, you know, why people wrote the things they did, is more getting into the heads of the character and being like, why are they acting the way they're acting? What's the, like, you know, funnily enough, but the first show that comes to mind is You, with Penn Badgley as the like serial killer. But because we empathize with the characters, because we understand his why, even though it's disgusting behavior, but that's what a lot of the movies nowadays are kind of putting to, is the humanization of the villains, is showing like the villain's point of view, like Loki and wicked and all of that. And so you're like, oh, I understand why they ended up doing all these bad things, or I understand why they're doing all these things. And so then you have empathy and compassion for them. And then, it just extends. They're such great tools. And then like singing lessons can help with acting and then can help with public speaking. It's not just isolated to that one skill set. It can emanate into so many different areas.
Yeah.
And that's why, like when we were looking at how like the importance of history for the House of Mages, it's because it's not, as I say, just learning facts. It's how you're approaching these things. And then in turn, how you can approach this type of material or just anything in your day-to-day.
Yeah.
And then look at the patterns to then see where you're going in the future as well. And it's just, it's so much more involved than people think it is.
Yeah. And like we really take for granted how much where we are as humans, like even though a lot of people think, oh, we've gone the wrong way as humans, and in some ways we probably have, but how far we've come as humans has been solely relied on sharing the information that came before. And like what we see a lot in the spiritual community is people just like acting as if they've just literally downloaded this idea out of nowhere, and not only not honoring or trying to find the lineage of where this actually came from and where they've learned it from, but just not having no desire to look into the history and not taking for granted how important it is, and thinking that everyone's doing something for the first time, which that's like pretty much the opposite of the truth. Like everything that we're doing is like maybe a slightly different variation of something we've done before. How did your relationship with history progress? And because you ended up, you must have really fallen in love with it to decide to study it so deeply as you did.
Yeah, I always had a fascination with Italy growing up, like always. And I don't know what I was subjected to early on in my youth, but it was something that even like Mum and I discussed a lot. Like I had such a calling to the Mediterranean region from such like young primary school age. I was just talking about Italy, and then I got to travel there and I freaking loved it. But so with Italy came the idea of ancient Rome and ancient Greece. And I loved mythology growing up, just from movies that I watched, I've got a list of things to talk about, but pin movies. So I started, my earliest memory of studying history was in year 6, because we learned a lot about like the Australian history, and I wasn't really fascinated or drawn to it. And I think later on, like at uni when I was studying history of Australia, I loved it so much because it was, I think what I gauged was how fake the history was that they were teaching us, and how watered down and stupid it was. And then going to uni and really, just diving into like the Scorpio rising aspect of me. I'm like, just give me the blood and gore. Like, stop trying to sugarcoat stuff for me. Like, just hit me with the truth. Like, hit me with the facts, Yeah. And I was at uni and I loved it. But it was medieval history in year 6. And then that led me on, I think, the show Merlin came out around that time for me as well, which then, that holds a special place in my heart anyways. But that was a big fascination of mine. So that was a moment that I remember just like really getting intrigued with history. And it's funny that I ended up more specializing in, that was in parentheses, in medieval history when I did my honours, kind of circled back to it. And then in high school, you learn little bits here and there in the first couple of years. And then in year 10, where I was, you got to choose if you wanted to do humanities, geography, or and then pick one of the sciences. And so I chose humanities over geography. And then 11 and 12, you got to choose if you wanted to do ancient or modern history, or then do any of the drop subjects and, change everything. And funnily enough, I was told not to do both histories because you will get confused at the dates and times and all of that. And so I chose ancient history over modern history because I wanted to learn about ancient Rome and all the cool stuff to do with the gods and mythologies, instead of feminism and terrorism and the wars. And then I went to uni, and then just everything I did was history. And by doing that gave me a well-rounded view of tracing where humans have come from, where we're going, why things happened the way they did, and just kind of, it's just like a bird's eye view. It's kind of taking your little egocentrical humanness and just pulling it out. And I think, funnily enough, doing SOR, which was studies of religion, helped as well with that curiosity, but more on the religious belief aspect as opposed to just culture, society, the economy, fashion, and all of that. Yeah, I was just always curious, always fascinated with, as I said, like why people were the way they were, why we are the way we are, why we believe the things we believe, always the why.
And how was, because I'm interested in how like your upbringing kind of contributed to that as well, because like, you know, I know your family and you got a pretty awesome family, and I know your mum would have like contributed a lot to your like curiosity and like supported you in that as well. So if you want to talk about your family a little bit and how that kind of influenced you.
Yeah, so my mum is a Capricorn. She's a Capricorn, Taurus, rising Cancer moon, and has a lot of Sagittarius placements. So those Sagittarius placements bring forth a lot of her questioning and fascination with knowledge. And what she says at the moment is a lot of the things that she would always question, because she was always questioning when she was younger as well. And like, why is it that these, very much like me, but I had the opportunity to go and study those things and find the answers for it. And so now kind of coming back, like in terms of, you know, how things kind of work the way they do with parents and children, I've now come in to kind of give her a lot of those answers. And she's like, it's so cool, because I've always questioned this, and I always was wondering about this. And she just settled on that, oh, well, it might just be this. Yeah. But now she has the answers. And so with that, a parental figure who was a large figure energetically in my life and the most prominent figure growing up, you know, that idea of osmosis, it kind of rubbed off on me. But I was speaking to Mum earlier just to kind of get an understanding of why I am the way I am. I was like, I can think about, you know, why I operate the way I do, just from what we can consciously remember. But I would like to hear your perspective. And literally, I was just born this way. But she said that, you know, like quite literally, like my grandpa even would just observe me as a baby and as a kid and was like, this isn't an ordinary kid. Just that idea of like, this is like an adult. Like this is someone that is just not just like, she's saying all these really profound things for such a young age. She's not just like, la, 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 skip around talking about fairies and stardust and woo. I was like, yeah, just saying really profound things to do with death and life and everything like that. And so having, I guess that is a cosmic imprint of kind of who I was, and naturally mixed with a family that was, or a mum especially, that was very liberal in her mindset and very inquisitive. And coming back to the movies, so the movies that I was subjected to, like I wasn't coddled in the sense of just constantly watching animations until I was 15, and kind of bubble wrapped in that idea of just sticking to children movies. I was watching James Bond at like 5. I had an older brother, or like older brothers, so I was watching those sort of movies. I remember watching Inglourious Bastards when I was like, gosh, how old was I? Like 11 or 12 whenever that came out. We went to go see it in gold class because it was like a family movie, in parentheses, for Father's Day. And that was, if you've ever seen Inglourious Bastards, you know what I'm talking about. But when we were watching the movies, we weren't just surface level watching it. Whenever we would finish watching it and come out of the movie theater, or just once we turned it off TV, Mum would ask us to unpack it. She was like, so what were the messages you got out of it? How did this make you feel? Just unpacking it all. And so I guess those skills, without us realizing it, I can only speak for myself, but the skills that I gained from that, like we would huff and puff, we'd be like, oh, I just want to absorb it. I just want to like be in the fields that it left me with. But it gave me the skills to start questioning like, and hearing from an adult's perspective of the symbolism within the films and the allegory within it and the metaphors and, again, why things happen the way they do and question it that way. That's why I think I hold movies
I really like that.
High
That's
up.
a good example. Yeah, because, it's a mix of the desire to search, the idea, like the desire to seek, to be curious, but then the tools to be able to, like, what am I meant to look for, right? It's, even like as an investigator, detective, you know what I mean? It's like, with Sherlock investigating certain things, like him saying, okay, well, you look for these kind of clues and these kind of things. And it's like that in life. And so it's cool that I love that how she nurtured your curiosity by giving you tools. It's like, without even realizing it, like by her asking questions, you're like, oh, so that's what I'm supposed to look for. And then next time, like, even if you couldn't answer that time, next time you go to the movies, this is what I'm looking for. And then starting to expand that. And that's really like what Tantra essentially is about, is being able to expand your capacity to make more choices, to like unpack more things, and just to have more possibility. And that's what I really crave as well. And that's probably why we've got along so well. But yeah, how do you, okay, I have a question for you.
Hit me.
It's actually a couple of questions. One. So it's, how did you go growing up and as you got older, especially because in school and stuff, especially like as soon as you leave school, you have more of an option of who to hang out with. But in school, like you're pretty much mainly around people your own age. So how did you go with that as you started to develop? And, did you find it difficult to gel with people your own age, or did you find it difficult to gel with people in general? And if you did have friends that you saw potential in to also like expand their repertoire of self-discovery, how did you go about like wanting to encourage them without trying to push them into something they may not be interested in?
So to, I guess, give you a depiction of who I was, apart from a history nerd, in year 10, so I was 15, I went through 14, I think, onwards. I went through a huge like vintage revival sort of thing where like when I was 15 or just before I got my first LP record machine, I was watching old movies. I was dressing like quite vintage, wearing like band t-shirts and being all into like Pink Floyd and Guns N' Roses and all of that. And so that was me. I was very cool. I had two main friends that I had similarities with. One of them I'm still very much friends with, and she ended up studying like psychology and law, and she meets me on the same level. We meet each other on the same level and are constantly unpacking a lot of things to do with why we are the way we are. And she is very much similar in that curiosity sense. And we also did history together. Another girl I also did history with, and she was into the vintage stuff. So I kind of met her on that level. I was a bit of a floater as well. I didn't really have set groups, like cliques. I kind of got along with everyone because, again, upbringing was like everyone has their own story. I was like, I just get along with a lot of the people. I have people I don't really want to interact with, especially, all girls' school, it can be very cliquey and bitchy. So, you could say like, while all these other girls are sleeping around at, adolescent times, going to parties, trying all these new things, I was just watching like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers at home with mum and listening to Pink Floyd on an LP, and discussing history and life with my friends and crystals, and then getting into astrology and all of that. So I guess it had its perks with anything though, like it's not one way of thinking and being isn't better than another way of thinking and being. It's just whatever your journey is and where you're needing to be. And it's just finding those people that match that. And I did. but it also held its challenges with, it being a select few. And that's also what I'm getting challenged with now as well. It's the people that I kind of want to click with and have in my circle and be more interactive with. It's a select few. It's not just with everyone, because I need that intellectual stimulation. So yeah, it's all journeys. Does that answer that part of the question?
Part of it.
Yes.
Yeah, so I would like you to expand on it a little bit more, in that, because I have a tendency, not so much as much anymore, but when I was getting into magic and, just spiritualism in general, and seeing the potential for life, the people I care about, who I'd see potential in, but seem to be not squandering their potential, but, I felt that they could benefit from, or they would understand this, but then they didn't seem to have the same desire I did. So it was kind of confusing.
Yeah,
it's like this stuff is amazing. Like, why wouldn't you want to get into this? And it's like, how much do you, try to influence them, like in regards to if you see potential of something in someone, and like how did that play out in your early friendships and stuff like that, especially because you were probably growing in a different way to a lot of the others.
I guess what I'm learning and seeing how much it's expanding my idea of who we are, why we are, and what is, and not understanding why other people aren't having the same sort of curiosity or benefiting from. Yeah, that's a constant struggle. That's mainly for me in regards to religion, as opposed to history, more so the history of religion as opposed to history. And it's something that I contended with in more so university, because especially two people, one in particular that I was like, how can you still believe this when you're a history major and you're learning about the history of this religion and what they've done and where it came from and why it became the way it did and is, yet you're still an active member in the church and doing all these things and like to the T a Christian in a box. I can't understand that, but I guess it's also a reflection of what skill I'm needing to learn of not my circus, not my monkeys. It's this, I'm learning these things for me.
Yeah.
I want to help other people and share that with other people, but I can't control them believing what I believe, because I don't like when that's done to me as well, when Jehovah's Witnesses come to the door, because we all view life through a different lens and view it from a particular way of viewing things. Yeah, just that whole thing that I'm like, I can't, that's what I have to remind myself, because I still go through it. I know the importance of studying history, and you get so much clapback from people of like, why study history? It's already been done. But that's just been a constant thing since high school. But I know the benefit of it. And then when I share that with people, they're like, oh.
So what would you say to someone who is possibly going through the same thing
of
getting that answer? People questioning why would you learn history?
Why would you learn history? Because it's awesome. What I say to people, I say it's given me a balanced perspective of life. It's helped me gain the skills for navigating the day-to-day, especially with political issues and socio-economical and cultural issues as well. It also gives me a bit of hope as well, because you can, I was sharing with Mum, even in regards to movies, because they say, what we're kind of going into is a little bit reminiscent of the Hunger Games and also Maze Runner as well. And you can hyperfixate on, the beginning and middle of those movies. But I look at the end. I'm like, yeah, but the people always overcome. The masses always win. It might take some time, but history shows the re-leveling and the rebalancing, and masses just being like, fuck you to the tyrannical rules and the monarchy, French Revolution, right? So for me, it gives me examples to give to others of what's happening and what has happened. So then, I don't know, just for me, it just makes my body feel good. It just
Good
makes me
answer.
feel real good.
Why would you study history? Makes my body feel good.
No, but literally, it puts my body at ease of even like astrologically of what we're about to go through, looking at the history of when it has happened in the past and what happened. Just it gives me the why. It gives me the answer to the why, I guess, because as we say, I think it was in the podcast we did for mine about demons. So go listen to that one. That's my train of thought. It was a good train of thought as well.
Well, until it comes back, I'll just...
No. No,
No,
you can
you
jump
go.
in.
If you've got it.
It'll come back. Why we study it. Okay, you go. Damn it, it was good.
Because I was going to say, like, you know, imagine a stressful situation that happens, right? But like, I imagine how stressful it is the first time it happens, but how much more you can handle that when like it happens again. And why is that? Because, you know, you're aware of the variables, you're aware of like what can happen and all that sort of stuff. But also like, it's like that idea, like this too shall pass. You understand that it's not going to last forever. And you've kind of experienced the whole thing and know how to handle it better. And, you know, humans work in cycles. This is just what we do. On, you know, literal levels and metaphorical spiritual levels, like we're always going through cycles, but trying to turn that circle into a spiral kind of thing, right? Learn from that. And when we reach that, be like, oh, I've been here before, and I get to choose a different action this time or approach this slightly differently. And I feel that that's the key to history, because, you know, if we always think that if this is always the first time that we're experiencing something, it's always, you know, probably going to be more stressful. We're going to be less efficient in managing it, and we're going to make, less informed decisions. But if we keep track of, oh no, this has happened before, last time we did this and it didn't work out at all, like it all turned to shit, so let's not try that one again, let's try something else, you know. And this is like learning by doing, and this is how humans, you know, a lot of people think that when we've developed something, we've just downloaded the perfect structure of something out of nowhere. No, like most of what happens is we mess up a whole bunch of times, but we're slowly learning different things and we're solving problems, and that's how we evolve. And, you know, we only get a limited time each generation for, you know, life on this planet. And so it's this passing on of history. And like if we start to take that for granted, and if we start to lose that, then we lose. It's so disrespectful to our ancestors, right? This is
and
like
their
we're
memory
here because of our ancestors.
Yeah, and that was not that part, but definitely aspects of that part was what I was going to say is what you said is in those moments that I'm like, oh my, like so much anxiety about what's happening in the world and what do I believe and all these things. It's people have experienced this before. People, and it just calms you down. It's like, oh, okay, I can see where we're going, instead of, because my body doesn't cope well with not knowing what's going to happen and doesn't cope well with surrendering. I like control. So having an understanding of why and how and where, you know, we're going, it just helps. And I think that's exactly it as well, of so many, like everything that we think and that we might perceive as inventions have been built upon previous foundations and previous thoughts. Like nothing in the modern age is really new.
Yeah.
And that can help in so many ways as well. And that's why I put, I highlight philosophy a lot as well, because that kind of is a bit of a balm for the conscious unraveling and kerfufflery and anxiety that can kind of come from life. And when you're going through the deconditioning process of like, oh my gosh, but it's like the shell around you is getting dissolved and you're just exposed. For me, philosophy, especially Stoicism, which I reference quite a bit, I reference it because it has just helped. It has helped me just ground and just level. It's like, oh, that feels good for me. It might not feel good for other people, but that's why there's so many different systems and so many different schools of thought for you to go and explore, because we're in the age of technology that you have all of this material at your fingertips, which our predecessors didn't have. Like even my mum's generation, my mum's in her 60s, she didn't go to university, but speaking to lecturers that are around her age, they had to go to, it sounds so ancient, had to go to libraries, and they had to like actually sift through the books and then flick through the books instead of just go Control F and finding the word, and then writing their thesis, their like 15,000 to sometimes 50,000 word thesis by hand and then by typewriter. Like, we're so lucky. And so it's kind of a slap in the face in many ways. Yeah, right? Just Google it. It's a bit of a slap in the face to our ancestors, I think. So it gives me the balance, but also respect and understanding of the opportunities that we have, and to not take it for granted, and just appreciation for the hardship that our ancestors went through in so many different ways, and just how easy we have it and how minuscule our problems really seem.
Yeah, I like that thing you shared in your story the other day. I don't know. I think you just shared it. I don't think you wrote it, but about how it had like, I'm definitely in the right generation because I can frolic in a castle without having to marry my cousin or something like that.
To ensure my bloodline.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like that movie that you showed me like early into our relationship. What was it? The Letters from
Letters from Juliet?
No, the one where they at the start of the movie they talk about romanticizing different eras, and then they
Midnight in Paris.
Yeah, Midnight in Paris. Yeah, that was such a good movie, and I loved how they like kind of pre-framed it as well. And it's so true because we do romanticize, like even if you look at medievalism and look at the reality of living in that, you're like, no way, like, where do I want to go back to that? But we have all the fantasy aspects of it, and like Merlin and everything, and romanticizing that. And so, like, I mean, personally, like, I love the idea and the aesthetic of it, but reality living back then. And it's so, and I think we see that now, especially in the spiritual community, like people talking about romanticizing like how it used to be, and like speaking things like it's fact, like our ancestors and our tribe live like this. It's like, where'd you get that information from? And like you see it all the time. Hey, like, everyone's like, oh, if only we could go back to the way it was back in this. It's like no one has any information about what we were actually doing in that age. How can you have that information about that? Where did you find that information? Like it's just.
And a lot of the, like, just to highlight as well, because I come across this so often online, is that history is changing. History isn't set in stone, and historians don't view it set in stone. There's a misconception that historians are like the wrongdoers and evil and like constantly manipulating information. It's like, sure, that could be a valid idea of those from the past.
Yeah.
But modern academia and historians, there is so much involved, and so much of your understanding about the world is thanks to historians. And it's such an undervalued field of scholarship. And there's so many different aspects of it. Like there's, in terms of the different categories, like intellectual history, feminist history, history of emotions, which is a new one where we're studying how people felt, and also the evolution of emotions from culture to culture, and how they, I guess, like actually felt about particular experiences based on, it's the same sort of I guess, source material that they're looking at, but how they're viewing the source material is changing. So it's like, okay, I just need the facts. And it's like, cool. Now we've got all the, facts in parentheses to create a roadmap of where we came from and where we are, and the key events that happened in between. That was majority of scholarship up until around the 1900s. And then there was a shift. There was a little bits of shifts here and there with the approach to it. But primarily in the last century is where we really got a huge shift, because that's especially when feminist history came into being, where it was like the women now finally being able to properly enter the university field even though many were studying history in their own ways, but actually getting recognition for it, they were like, cool, where were the women in all of this? And what was their experience with all of this? So a lot of these people talking about, and I just because it's at the forefront of my mind because I was talking about it today in comment sections, but the witch wound, a lot of these people talking about the witch wound wouldn't really know about anything to do with that and the female experience within that if it wasn't thanks to female historians of the last century. But a lot of the time, they're so hell-bent on viewing outdated material. And the reason I say that is because we've now got access to more source material and it's changing. Like these figures there's this one figure of the witch hunts that is 9 million women died or people died. And some people say it's only women of that figure, which is not correct. That figure came about in the 1700s from a German historian where people were throwing around it, like the witch hunts in the medieval sense and what we kind of classify as the witch hunts ended. And so people were like, okay, cool, this just happened. Let's figure out what the hell happened. And there was so many figures being thrown around between like 100,000 to like 100 million and just like ridiculous amounts. And this is across the globe. And so this guy threw out the number of 9 million. And then in the last century, a feminist historian, I can't remember her name, she really promoted this idea of the 9 million and just drove with that figure till the cows came home. And then The Burning Times, which was a documentary that came out in the latter part of the century, just initiated a whole new, I'll just say like, interest in the idea of the witch hunts, I guess, because like Wicca was like starting to pick up pace again. It's after the 80s with the satanic panic and it was still very much alive in people's experience. And they, again, promoted the idea of the 9 million. But what we have as a modern and contemporary figure is around about 30,000 to 60,000 people. Not just women, because it depends on the location you look at. In Russia, it was primarily men that were executed.
Yeah, in Iceland, it was primarily men that were executed. Exactly,
and it was what they were executed for. It was heresy, and that's when they were tried and executed, primarily through hanging, because that was the result of getting tried under heresy, was getting hung. And then in Scotland, they then burned the bodies. So it was death and then burning instead of burning alive. Some places did that, but it was not the going result in execution form.
Yeah.
So it's like the reason I mention that is, I guess, because confirmation bias, and it goes on both ends, but there is a lot more of it on the end of what we said in the previous podcast as well. Is a lot of people that don't know their stuff have the strongest opinions.
Yeah.
And also aren't open to hearing the other side or hearing new information that might fizzle it. And the confirmation bias that goes on both ends of like, okay, well, what is this serving you by having this figure of 9 million? And why aren't you open to hearing that it's actually less than that?
Yeah.
It's not taking away from the extent of the horrors that took place. It's just giving you a different understanding of the time that you were in. Because also the population wasn't too big either compared to nowadays, because people weren't procreating as much because of poverty and death.
So that you know, like that 40,000 could be equal to, you know, a few million.
Our modern 9 million.
Yeah. So and I just want to bring back to something you touched on before, because you were saying that the source material is like always changing. We're finding more, but like not just the source material, but also our ability to interpret that source material as well. Because like an example is, you know, in the early 1900s when we were finding all these Sanskrit texts, you know, we didn't have many Sanskritists, especially in the Western world, to be able to translate these. And so, you know, the initial translations are the thing that basically, you know, like we've talked about this before in past podcasts about how much that, like, from a couple of very badly translated Sanskrit texts, we now have like the 7 chakra rainbow system. We have all these like occult practices that are based on, only the few texts that we had that were also very badly translated. And so that's led to 100 years of, stuff that has led to good things. But now, like, we're looking back and we're like, oh, actually, we not only have many more texts that actually debunk a lot of these other things that we thought, but now we have so much more ability to interpret more accurately. This word didn't even mean this. Like, they interpreted this word as this. And, like, how much can the interpretation of a few words completely change where you go with this? And people underestimate that as well. They take everything as like gospel, everything is like truth and fact. And I think like this is just a really good example of how we approach life as well. It's like, cool, where are our sources from? Like, are these sources like good and accurate? And are we even if they are good and accurate, are we interpreting them in a good and accurate way, or are we just taking what we want to hear from them? Or, are we have we been given the wrong decoder altogether? And and I think through this, it can help a lot. Like it was interesting. What's that stone? The Rosetta Stone?
Rosetta Stone.
Yeah. For example. So do you want to explain what the Rosetta Stone is? So
the Rosetta Stone was like it's a big stone with writing on it. In a nutshell. But it was the one that was like the first way of analyze or comparing languages, which also it baffles me. Like people, because I'm not a linguist and I haven't studied the evolution of language, but that for me is something so extraordinary of when you look at the first people that were speaking barbaric in terms of blah, 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 blah. And meeting someone else that was like, blah, 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 blah. And then being able to then speak the other's language by pointing to a rock and it's like, blah, blah. And the other person's like, blah, blah. And
because it was like
Greek and Egyptian.
Okay.
Yeah. So then they wrote the same text, but in those different languages.
Yeah.
So then they know what letters and combination of letters mean the same thing in this other awful way of explaining that, but these letters and combination of letters equal this picture in hieroglyphics. There's this linguistic that I follow, linguist that I follow, who he again is incredible, like speaks so many different languages and studies so many different languages and studies how languages turn into other languages and the root words and how it evolves into different languages, which, is something that I know we've discussed about other people. One of the many things we've discussed about other people, but how they disregard the evolution of language and linguistics when it's a proper science.
And that's the thing. Like the way that people put things together, like it's just. There was something else. Something I saved the other night that I don't think I ended up sending you. That I was going to show. I'll send it to you. But like the way that in the New Age community, like the people put up like, this like the old Egyptian hieroglyphic for this was this, and so that's connected to this, and they just draw these lines that whatever they want. So they're not, they can find lines between anything. But then if you look at linguistics, like and they're just resharing stuff. Like, people have showed how quickly these things spread. There was this show, I don't know if you ever watched it, called Hungry Beast. And they used to do all these kind of experiments and stuff. And one of their first episodes, they wanted to see how quickly a completely bogus headline would spread in the mainstream media. And so they made up this completely bogus thing and then just shared it. And it showed that, they didn't even fact check it. Like they just wanted to be the first one to publish this. Yeah. And it happens so much.
I think that happened with NASA with the 13th star sign. I'm pretty sure that one was a hoax just to see, for pretty much the same experiment. That's what I heard and I believe it, but it might not be it. But no, that's the thing. And also why draw really profound and non-conducive conclusions about the evolution of particular words or even just historical events and, you know, the overlap of particular methodologies and ideologies, when you could draw upon so many different points of history. But I think it's due to, again, just the lack of knowledge of history and historical events and what actually happened. You hear certain like, again, just another one on the forefront of the mind. You hear a lot of connection between Tantra and Egypt currently, with Christ consciousness as well, and tying in Mary Magdalene and Jesus into that. And then you see a lot of trying to overlap a lot onto Tantra, which were like, it doesn't, like, why? Like, why are you doing that? Is it just because it's a buzzword and it's cool and it's trending? But why not appreciate something as a standalone and romanticize even that? Because we romanticize Egypt a lot, and that really came about in the 1920s is when we see the Egyptian revival, because there was a lot of new development about with Egyptologists and uncovering a lot of the tombs, and which is fair enough. Like, again, context, you look at the time, a lot of poverty, and then going to Egypt and seeing all these people uncovering this mass amount of wealth of gold and jewels and all of these really just interesting and intricate artifacts. And so then they romanticize, and then also, you know, people dying from opening tombs, but that's less about curses rather than what toxins were kind of in and around them, apparently. But we use, you know, Indiana Jones is kind of referencing a lot of those things. And then you get, then that goes into the pop culture of particular haircuts, which also was parallel to the feminist movement and women reshaping their bodies to be more masculine in the sense of abandoning their corsets, and then also the washboard look, so really flattening out their chests, cutting their hair because they're like, you know, the hair of femininity or representative of femininity, cutting it to be the boy cut, shortening their skirts as well, being a bit provocative. And then you get a lot of material of the Art Deco look is very Egyptian in style, and scarabs and all of that. So that was, I feel, when the idea of Egypt being this, I don't know, people think of it as otherworldly as well, which, you know, goes into starseed stuff, but I'm not going to go on that tangent. But it's
and it's funny that people don't say that kind of stuff about cathedrals, right?
Yeah, like, or anything to do with paganism, like other paganisms.
Like, it's just, and that's the thing as well that, like, you would have seen the history, because I remember reading, because I think we assume that when civilizations conquer another civilization, it's pretty much always about war, because that's what we see in movies and stuff. But what happened more so than not, and it makes sense, is prestige. And so, like, especially when I was reading about the history of like Rome, and it makes sense because you have, like, in your head, like, you see Gladiator and all that sort of stuff, all these, like, you know, they just like conquer the barbarians or whatever. But what happened more than not is, like, the Romans would show up to a civilization, you know, draped in like gold and all this clad armor, and had their prestige, and like the other civilization be like, oh, whoa, they look really like cool and you know, divine, and they just show their prestige and be like, yeah, you want to be with like us? All you have to do is convert. And they're like, oh yeah, sweet, let's do it.
Yeah, Christians.
And and like and that makes sense, because like if you because I remember at that moment I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense, because it was like, otherwise if they just keep fighting wars, they'd run out of troops, right?
And so much money involved.
Yeah, but we are not immune to that. Like, you know, we go to a civilization and like even like the way that like Christianity and stuff like that has barbarized, or whatever you would call it, like paganism and stuff, because like, oh, they're so like, you know, they just got little wooden huts and but we've got big cathedrals. Like a similar thing has happened with Egypt, like you were saying, like they unearthed all this gold and like, you know, amazing structures, but that is why they created it, not just as like a service to their gods and stuff, but basically to have prestige. The
Pyramid of Giza was a freaking tomb. for a pharaoh in like the first part of the Old Kingdom. And they've also like, and that's the thing, like history is constantly being uncovered. Like they've just found another like tunnel underneath the Pyramid of Giza, which some have, like, I'm not an engineer, but some have philosophized that it could be to do with stabilizing the structure.
Yeah.
It could be another passageway to another tomb or another, you know, crypt or statue and all of that. But it's constantly evolving, and there's aspects of history, like because there's just so much happening in Egypt at the moment and in Sudan in terms of archaeological facts, like artifacts being uncovered. Like Cleopatra's tombs more than likely have just been found by, it's just incredible. I highly suggest people look into that if it hasn't already been found by the time you release it. It depends on how long you wait for this one. A queen was just discovered or rediscovered that we have no record of, which for me is fascinating. And there's a lot of, even in like, so what's happening in Sudan at the moment is the history of a particular time period and peoples is pretty much about to be rewritten by what they've just uncovered. And that's so much of history is that. And that's what we're striving for. We're trying to uncover things and find things. Like Pompeii wasn't even found until, I think it was like when was it? Like 100 years before Australia was colonized. I'm pretty sure was the time. I might be wrong on that, but it was quite a bit of time before Australia was colonized that Pompeii was starting to be excavated. And for me, I found that out when I was over there in 2017. And by that time, I was like, at the end of my tertiary studies of it. And I'd studied so much about the Colosseum and ancient civilizations and all of that, but it was being in the place, in the ruins, and hearing that it was just like a time warp and just like oh my gosh, of living in Australia and having that time loop. And before that, we only had like a handful of accounts about Pompeii and what happened. And then people uncovered it and then found more. And yeah, it's just I'm tying myself into the field of historians, even though I've just, got a bachelor's in honours. But they're constantly striving to uncover more about us as humans, and they're of service to us. They're not trying to gatekeep or hide information. They're trying to reveal it. And and that's what I'm seeing online is there's this idea of, as I said earlier, like of historians being this evil cabal, and it's just like, that's not the case. There's a huge misunderstanding that's happened there.
Yeah, it's just the way that people speak in absolutes. Like, I think the more that I learn, like, I try to change my language around, like, oh, well, this author wrote this about this, and apparently this, and like, as I understand this, and just trying to, I can even do that too, like too much sometimes, like, because I'm so much aware that even like you were saying, stuff that's written as historical fact could change, or it could have changed since I read it. You know what I mean? Because things are moving so quickly. Like I could have read a book like 10 years ago that like stated this thing as fact, but then something's happened that since then that has debunked that. And
as long as you're getting it from something that is actually, factual instead of just
again, and like it's probably leading into more of the other podcasts that we have planned. But just the way that people, and the thing is, like, I'm careful to say things as fact, even if I read them in a valuable text, like an academic text, let alone like people that they see something on like shared on Facebook and then they speak it as fact. Yeah. And
don't look further into it.
Yeah.
Because that's, like, as I said earlier, in history, that's what we're told to do and taught to do, is look at who wrote that text, because they will have their own bias. And a lot of the time, like if, one example is just like, back in ancient Rome of historians of that time transcribing what politicians were saying at that time. Obviously, they're going to be more pro-politician or a particular politician and anti the other one because they're trying to promote this person's stuff. Historians understand that.
Yeah.
And so they're going to be viewing it through that lens of, okay, let's look at what happened. I can understand that this person is going to be very pro, like the language, the evocative language that they're using is going to be very pro or very anti.
Yeah.
And so we understand that, but let's kind of sift through that to try to find the facts. And that's, again, very similar to the reconstruction of our Norse heritage and the Viking era, is because a lot of their texts have been lost or weren't even written down in the first place. And a lot of the texts that survive are from people that had experienced brute force from the Vikings, or a lot of hardship. Yeah. I think one of the main ones is when the Vikings went to that monastery in England and just completely ravaged the place. And then those monks that were there just wrote down like how barbaric they were, and they just did this, and they were just savages. When that might not have been the actual case at hand. There could be definitely truth to it, but we don't know the other end of it, because for the most part of what we've uncovered is that they were farming people. They were farmers and traders, and they went a Viking, which was to then, go and do what we know them to do.
Yeah.
But for the most part, they were just chill people.
Yeah, and that's it. Like, we don't see that side of it because it wasn't recorded.
And it's not cool because it's not, cool in terms of like, you can't romanticize that barbarian, like, that thing, a new little series that I've just recently done on my Instagram, I'm still doing as well because there's just so much to uncover. But we have even the gladiators I just wrote down. We have this idea of history of, especially in the modern times, like with a lot of men being like, just want to be like back at the Viking time where the men were just men that were like this, and like the gladiators were just like all these muscly men. The gladiators were actually fat. They weren't like, the very built, muscular Greek sort of sculpture. They were fat because they were well fed, because fat adds padding to the body. Therefore, when they were stabbed, it was less likely to hit an organ. And the Vikings were there. They could have been very like hyper masculine, but also the texts that we have about the mythologies, they weren't, and what we have evidence of the laws and the
and
how women acted with divorce.
They had a yearly ritual like to confuse the spirits, and I can't remember what part of Europe, but it was a indigenous European ritual. I remember reading about that once a year. It's kind of like a Halloween thing. They would confuse the spirits by cross-dressing. And so similar to the Thor dressing up as Freya part in the myth. Yeah. I think there's, it stems from the same idea that like they'd confuse the spirits, and then they'd like suddenly, because the spirits would go up their dress or something like that to be like, oh, and then then the spirits would get freaked out. So like, yeah, exactly. So, and like that was just all in fun and games, and like, it's funny, like a mix of romanticizing it, but also movies. Like they think people watch movies like Spartacus and Gladiator and be like, oh, that's history. I mean, I do the same thing. I watch Brad Pitt. I was like, oh yeah, Brad
that's
Pitt.
Very fair. That's very fair. But it's nice to, and that's the thing, like initially I wanted to be a historical advisor for films because I saw the amount of inaccuracies in them, and I was like, why? I understand creative license, but you don't have to falsify history because there is so much drama in it, and it is so interesting without all of this retelling of it to suit particular agendas. Because I also understand the people that watch movies and historical movies and take that as fact. Like with the newer rendition of like Mary Queen of Scots with Margot Robbie and Saoirse Ronan, and people watching that and believing that those two figures actually met, when one, there's no historical data of it, and what data we do have of it, they would not have met. Like they wouldn't have come together to be like, look, sisters have to have each other's back. We're both, the victim of the patriarchy and all of this. Fuck no. Like Queen Elizabeth, from what I have gathered, so much in the masculine energy and not really caring about the female, because she had to strip all of that away to be respected, and was primed in that way in order to rule. Kind of like that's another thing, but like Athena, a lot of people might look to her for just like this power, which she was like a powerful female force, but she was born from a man. Like she was born just straight from Zeus, from his head. He had a headache and he got an axe and like had his head cracked open, and out popped Athena. So there was no gestation from like a female and a man for there to be any sort of feminine attributes to her apart from just her physical appearance. And that's when she has like a lot of the stereotypical cultural masculine qualities. Like with these things, romanticize them 100%, but also understand the reality of them by looking at the time period. And it's when you take examples from things, just make sure, just look at what you're taking those examples from.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, and like with that example of like with gender bending and cross-dressing and transgender and sexuality, because there's so much political stuff at the moment that is like, it's dominating the world. It's kind of like it's never been done before. It's this new trend and it's all this. To a degree, I understand that standpoint. But looking at history, we have been the kinkiest animals, apart from dolphins, but we've been the most kinkiest, mentally disturbed, also compassionate to a degree, and homoerotic culture. Like, yeah, a lot of people look to ancient Greece for that as well. Yet something I mentioned in those posts is we seem to acknowledge ancient Greece as this, very sexual and homoerotic culture and accept it for some reason. I say for some reason because it's like we accept that but don't accept everything else in between or where we are now. It's like it's so far removed that it's still a fantasy instead of something that actually happened. It's like that detachment. There was an example that we would, in history, like we're laughing at all of the horrendous stuff that went down in ancient Greece and Rome with particular rulers. And just, it's so comical because for our minds, it's so unfathomable. Like I can't imagine that even happening.
Yeah.
But the moment you try to joke about Hitler or Stalin or Mao, you're like, it's too close. You can have more of that discernment of like, oh no, you don't joke about that. Like that's so disturbed. But they were so more like a lot of the time more mentally disturbed and sexually disturbed back during these times. Yet we have more of that distance and disassociation from it.
Yeah.
Even that because you can still visit the ruins of these places. I'm talking about like even dungeons and like sex dungeons of the medieval period. Like in Prague, there's one of the dungeons that you can go visit. And it kind of brings it more into reality of like, oh, okay, this actually did take place. All of these things actually happened. And seeing how that feels in the body to kind of hear about it.
Yeah.
History is fascinating, man.
It is. So we're
in a nutshell, gladiators were fat and
yeah, exactly. So like what you see in the movies is not necessarily history, and also what you see in the movies is heavily influenced by a lot of different factors. So would you like to leave the listeners with any last bits of Leo Sun, Libra Moon, Scorpio Rising pieces of
history is cool. Being a nerd's cool. I just want to say, just look into things. Honestly, utilize Google. Like any question that you have before like posting it online, Google it. Look at where, like the source, like, where you're Googling it from. Is it a Reddit page or is it from like an academic source? Honestly, utilize Wikipedia. Wikipedia is amazing, but just cross-reference it. Like if you get onto a train of thought, just, cross-reference. Utilize Wikipedia, Google it, recognize that whatever you're feeling and going through, more often than not, there is a whole line of people that have experienced very similar things to you, if not worse. Not to bypass that, but, there's a lot more hardship that people are currently going through as well and have gone through. And to finds, I guess, solace or comfort in listening to those people through the source material that we have. Like we have Anne Frank's journal that a lot of people look towards to find, through all the hardship and torment that she went through, that she still had hope and still had compassion and, sympathy for people in life.
Yeah. And so we're all still figuring it out. Like there's a really quote I like. There's like, humans are a continuous work in progress that mistakenly think we're a finished product.
I like that.
We're just always a work in progress. So if we give compassion to ourselves and other people, that we're always just, kind of like finding our way through the dark, because we really
seek the mystery. Yeah, utilize Google, recognize your privilege that you have and the blessings that you are blessed with in this day and age, and the resources you have at your fingertips, to not take that for granted and to not be stupid with it. I was like, in my tipsy state, there's no reason to be stupid in this day and age. Just because, honestly, look into your natal chart of astrology. That is what I share, and I think if you release that one, that is what led me into more of self-awareness, was my natal chart of astrology. So yeah, look into that. That's all I have to say for now.
Look into history, learn your natal chart,
and just be like me.
Ya bish. Ya bish. We out. Yeah. You can find Cassandra's links everywhere. Everywhere you look,
find me everywhere.
You can find her everywhere. I will be rubbing her all over the interwebs, everywhere for her, where you can see. But if you are not in a the vicinity which has received her osmosis yet, you can quicken that process by clicking one of the links in the show description for Miss Cassandra Paulke. Thank you again, and I
don't hold any liability to what amounts from you being in my orbit.
Yes. We take no responsibility for the things where
conscious unraveling.
The conscious unraveling. It's like 10 o'clock here, and we've done quite a few hours of podcasting today together. So I'm quite impressed that we're still, and we've been drinking a little bit. So Thank you all, and make yoga
magic again.
Thank you so much for listening and being a part of this episode of Make Yoga Magic Again, the House of Mages podcast. I've been your host, Daniel Erulian Cuming. A massive thank you to Cassandra Paulke for being my guest for today. As usual, you can find all the information about our guest Cassandra in the show notes below, as well as more about what we do at Ritual Embodiment and the House of Mages. Thank you again. I'll speak to you soon, and until then, make yoga magic again.